Let's teach Gerald how to knit. I have been so excited to get started with this today. It is Tuesday morning. I have all of my supplies here ready to go to give you just a little brief introduction to the supplies that you are going to need in order to make our dishcloth. Now, I have two here today to share with you. These are dishcloths that actually my friend Adrian from the Fiber Friends podcast knit for me for Christmas. And this one that I'm showing you right now, this blue one, I've actually used a fair bit. And it's been through the washer and dryer many times. And as you can see, it still looks pretty darn good, almost brand new. This is the Christmas one that she made for me. This one I have not used yet. I was saving this one for Christmas time next year so that it still looks nice and fresh. But as you can tell, new versus the older one, they hold up quite well. So this is the pattern that we are going to make, Gerald, so I hope you're ready. The supplies that we're going to need are one ball of a cotton yarn. Now, there's lots of different kinds, lots of different brands that you can buy. And just like Michelle Bendy Stitchy always says, no back shaming, we are not going to yarn shame here. So whatever your budget allows for is what is just going to work out just fine. For dishcloths, we have to use cotton. So I believe, I know here in Canada, there's a brand put out by Patents called Peaches and Cream. This particular cotton that I am using today is from an online company from the States called Knit Picks. And I'll just show you the ball band here. So as you can see, it's from Knit Picks and it's called Dishy. And I love Dishy. This is what Adrian used to knit these ones from as well. It just feels really nice. And so when I was planning to make dishcloths myself, I purchased the Dishy from Knit Picks a few months ago. We placed a rather large order, all of us together. Okay, so now that we've discussed the kind of yarn that you need to use, we need to talk about needles. So if you look on the back of the ball band that comes with your yarn, there's a little bit of information here that you have to learn how to decode. So as we look at the back, we can see, first of all, the ingredients of the yarn, basically. So this yarn is 100% cotton. There's 190 yards in this ball, which is approximately 100 grams. Some patterns, you will see they will call for a certain amount of weight of yarn to be used, and some will call for a certain amount of yards. Now, because this is American, it is in yards. In Canada, our yarn, we will get it in both meters and yards. So the weight of yarn is also an important thing to know. This is what is known as a worsted weight, which is kind of, it's really sort of the medium weight yarn. So this is a worsted weight hand feel. And so worsted weight, the information that's given below for this particular type of cotton yarn, they give you this information. 4.5 stitches equals 1 inch on number 7 to 8 needles. Okay, so what that means, you're going to hear the word gauge or a gauge swatch many times over the next little while. If you watch the Fiber Friends, you know that I am not a huge fan of the gauge swatch, though I am well aware, and Louise is always telling me that it's a very important tool in your knitter's bag of tricks. So we will talk about gauge and gauge swatches another time. But for now, the information that you need to take from this is this information right here. Number 7 or 8 needles. That's not 7 to 8, it's a number 7 or a number 8 needle. Now here's where things get a little tricky depending on where you live, because there are various ways that needles are labeled and measured. And unlike stitching, in stitching, the lower the number, the bigger the needle. Well, in knitting, the higher the number, the bigger the needle. So a number 7 is known as a 4.5 millimeter needle. And a number 8 needle, or a US 8, is known as a 5 millimeter needle, and that's its measurement. So it's a 5 millimeter needle. So now we have to say, okay, so I know that I need a number 7 or a number 8 needle. Now let's keep things simple. If you're brand new and you're just starting out, I'm going to recommend that you go for a US 8 needle. So you're gonna look for a US 8 needle. Now what kind of needle do you get? Because they come in wood, they come in metal, they come in straights, they come in circular. So here's where a little bit of personal preference comes into play, and also budget comes into play. If you can afford to buy a few pairs of different kinds, then you can play around with what you will end up preferring or liking. So here I have a pair of straights, and these are bamboo, and these are 4.5 millimeter, which means these are going to be a US 7. And here I have a pair of metal. I love these. These are my mother-in-law's needles. I learned how to knit on these. So these are quite old. These are US 8. So you can see the number 8 there. So I know that they're a US 8. But I know also that my mother-in-law was British, and British sizing tends to be different as well. So before I start knitting on old needles, I always check the size of my needles with a needle gauge. And that is something that you can purchase. You know, like stitching, there's lots of different tools that you can, have in your toolkit. You do not need a needle gauge right out of the bat, because you're going to be buying a new needle and you'll know what size it is. So you want to look for a US 8. So again, these are straights. Lots of people still knit on straights, though I'm finding that most people now who are new knitters or younger knitters tend to be knitting on circular needles. And actually circular needles are what I use pretty much 100% of the time now, even knitting flat. You don't have to be knitting in a circle to be using circular needles. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so those are our straights, and those are the two different materials. We've got wood and metal straights, and we've talked about sizing. So we're looking for a US 8, which if you are not living in the States, you are looking for a 5 millimeter. So a 5 millimeter US 8 needle. They also come in circular. So now what I've done is I have left my project here on my needle so that you can see how I knit. And this is not a dishcloth. This is a different project. This is my circular needle. So you can see these are from Knit Picks, and these are called the Harmony needles. And I don't think that they sell this particular style of needle anymore, but I do know that they sell something called a rainbow needle, and I think the rainbow needle is very, very similar. It's not a gimmick. Knit Picks needles are lovely, and they're affordable, so you don't have to break the bank in order to try maybe a few different styles of needle to see which one you like. I'm pretty sure that this is 4.5, which would be a US 7. I don't generally tend to knit on 5s because when we discuss gauge, we'll get deeper into this conversation. But as you learn to knit, and as you practice, you will find out what kind of a knitter you are, whether you are a tight knitter or a loose knitter. And that all depends on tension. And that's what we discover when we knit to gauge. Are you a loose knitter or are you a tight knitter? Well, I am a very, very loose knitter. So that means that I generally have to use smaller needles in order to produce a project that isn't too small, if that makes sense, or too big. Too big or too small. Anyways, that's why we do gauge swatches, so that we can discover what size needle we need to use. However, because this is going to be a dishcloth, we're just going to go ahead with that US 8. If you already know that you are planning on sticking with us for these tutorial videos, the next thing that I'm going to be teaching Gerald how to knit is a hat. And so if you think that you would also like to learn how to knit a hat, I am going to recommend that you just go right ahead and purchase a US 8 circular needle, because then you can use it for both your dishcloth and your hat. If you buy the US 8, you will be able to make a dishcloth and a hat using a worsted weight woolen yarn. And that needle size should work for both projects. Now, the next question is, what length of needle do I get? To make a hat, the most common size that you want is a 16-inch circular. So a 16-inch circular US 8. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of this information on my blog, www.offthegridneedlearts.com. And so if you head over to my blog, and I will put a link to my blog underneath in the description box, I'm going to list exactly what you need. And it doesn't have to be from Knit Picks. If you go to Michael's or I don't know if Joann's even sells knitting supplies. I've never been to one in the States, but I know my Michael's sells all of these things very inexpensively. If you have a local yarn shop, might be a nice place to go and check out and visit. More towns now have local yarn shops than needlework shops. They're slightly more prevalent than needlework shops. So it may be easier for you to find a local yarn shop. And I can't recommend more visiting one and getting to know the owner, because that's how you're going to meet people. That's how you're going to meet other knitters. And there's no better way to get help or, join a knit night and find other people that are just like you. And it's so fun. We're very lucky here in London. We have two wonderful yarn shops, London Yarns and Knit Stitch, which is the shop where I go for my weekly knit night. And I've met some wonderful friends, and it's just a great thing to do. So Gerald, I hope that you're already scouting out your local yarn shops, and I hope you're going to be visiting them and meeting the owner and looking for a knit night as well. So again, a 16-inch circular needle, and it's going to be a US 8, and you're going to want some dishi. I'm also going to suggest that you purchase a very inexpensive ball or skein of just a general yarn, okay? Just a general yarn, because before we start to make the dishcloth, we have to learn how to do a few things. So I've brought a few things here to show you. This is a leftover ball of yarn that I made a scarf for my dad. And so Patton's is, the factory actually is in Ontario where I live. It's about 2 hours away from me, the factory outlet where they make the yarn. And so Patton's is very easy to find where I live. I'm pretty sure it's pretty basic everywhere in North America. It's fairly easy to find. Patton's Classic Wool Worsted is a wonderfully good, inexpensive, pure wool. So if you don't find it too, scratchy, some people don't really like pure wool because they find it a bit scratchy. It doesn't bother me. And as far as I'm concerned, Patton's really isn't all that scratchy. There are scratchier, but it is a pure wool. If pure wool isn't in your budget, go for acrylic. I have some acrylic here. I do not still have the ball band for this. This was from a blanket that I'm making for my son. Acrylic has its place. If you're doing gifts for people who are not crafters, who are probably going to chuck it in the washing machine and the dryer and not give a second thought about what they're doing, they deserve acrylic because it's inexpensive and they can't ruin it. I am not adverse to knitting with acrylic. I do it. So don't feel that there's something wrong with or less than acrylic. If that's what you can afford, that's your budget, then go for it. You're still just learning how to knit. The stitches are exactly the same, no matter what you're using to knit with. So that's what's really important. So you want some inexpensive yarn, and you're going to still be using your US 8 needles, so you don't need any different needle, but you need some practice yarn, because we have to learn how to cast on. We have to learn how to do the knit stitch. I'm going to also teach you how to do the purl stitch. I'm going to teach you how to increase stitches. I'm going to teach you how to decrease stitches. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to make like a little, almost like, think about it as a cross stitch sampler. We're going to make a knit sampler, and it's not going to turn out to be anything because you're going to knit and then you're going to rip it out, and then you're going to knit and then you're going to rip it out. You are going to be reusing this practice yarn a bunch of times. And so that's what's coming up next. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, I think I've covered everything here, but you know, it's likely that I've forgotten something. It's likely that you have questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this video as is. What I would like you to do is visit my blog and, you know, check out the list of things that I'm going to put there that you need. If you have any other questions that I haven't answered, leave me questions. So leave questions on this video, leave questions on my blog, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to record another answer video before we start our very first tutorial, which will be learning how to cast on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan on doing that answer video on Sunday afternoon. So look for the answer video on Sunday night, and then Tuesday morning, bright and early, I will record a video teaching everyone how to cast on. So I hope you'll join me. And until then, leave me lots of questions, and I really, really, really am looking forward to doing this with everyone. And Gerald, I hope you're gonna have fun. I can't wait to see and watch as you learn how to knit. So, happy knitting, everyone. See you soon.